Like what we're doing here at Cube4two? Click the like and subscribe button to let us know. Also, Cube4two is a Tcgplayer affiliate. Use the link in the show notes for all your shopping needs to help support the channel. But if you want to go that extra mile, you can always support us on Patreon. You can use the link in the show notes to let us know how much you enjoy our content, because we enjoy making it for you. Alright guys, let's get started. What's good, Cubers? It's your boy Matt, and I'm back. And normally about this time in the video, I post a question from a viewer or a question from Twitter that I got in a tweet, but this week, our video was determined by my patrons. Yeah, we're official. We got a Patreon now. Look, I don't plan on plugging it at the front of all my videos like this, but I did want you to know we got one, and if you're interested in supporting the channel, that's one of the best ways to do so. But with that said, let's get started. So the patrons voted on the topic for this week's video, and this week we're going to be talking about cube cards that are best left in vintage-only formats. Before I get too deep into this, some of you are going to be upset, including me, because I play some of these cards in a non-powered environment. Still, if I'm being honest, you have to understand that these cards can create feel-bad moments or they're crazy overpowered, and so unless you and your play group are okay with those kind of interactions, and some of us are, then you might want to shy away from them unless you're playing in a powered environment. And let's go color by color and talk about the most broken and probably only broken card in white. Now that I've said that, you probably know what it is. It's balance. 2 mana to wipe the board is incredibly overpowered, particularly in non-powered environments. See, this card doesn't have the word planeswalker or artifact on it, and as a result, it's very easy to build a deck around it that punishes your opponent and creates a completely asymmetrical effect. And again, it's only 2 mana. So this is the one white card that you should shun unless you're playing in a vintage powered environment. And that's the only one. So let's go to the truly busted color. Let's talk about blue cards for a second. Now there are 3 obvious blue cards that you only play in a powered environment. Ancestral Recall, Time Walk, Time Twister, these are members of the Power 9 for a reason, and running any of them in your cube denotes that you're running a powered cube. So I'm not going to spend much time on these. You only play these if you're running power. The end. Let's move on to some cards you might not be thinking about. And you're going to notice a trend amongst a lot of our broken cards, and that is mana cheat. And a great example of that is Show and Tell. For 2 and a blue, you get to sneak the fattest creature in your hand onto the battlefield. Actually, it doesn't even have to be a creature. It could be an artifact or an enchantment as well. But most of the time, it's a big fat Eldrazi. The thing with Show and Tell is it lets you, for 3 mana, play something that costs 8 mana. An 8 mana cheat, even on turn 3, is a huge deal and frequently game warping and game ending. Now, I am guilty of playing this card in a non-vintage environment, and I will attest openly that it can create some feel-bad moments. There are some insta-win moments where someone casts Show and Tell, lays down an Eldrazi, and the game ends in a very early turn. So if you and your play group are okay with that, then I guess you can live your life that way. But if you are truly looking for a balanced, unpowered play experience, you should probably skip Show and Tell. You should also skip Mana Drain. This card is stupid. So Mana Drain feeds you extra mana, again, mana cheat, and most of the time it ramps you 3 or 4 colorless mana at a time and lets you do stuff that you'd never be able to do otherwise. Casting cards like Papa Teferi on turn 3 is pretty dang busted. Mana Drain is an exceptional counterspell and isn't fair in any environment outside of a powered environment. And lastly, you guys know my feelings on Tinker. I think Tinker is pretty gross. I think it's a wildly unfair card, and again, it's mana cheat. You cast Tinker on turn 2 or 3, you go get a 8-drop or a 10-drop out of your deck and drop it on the battlefield. You've cheated 7 mana all in one turn, and that's why Tinker can create that one-sided play experience. So these are blue cards that you probably don't want to play unless you're in a vintage powered environment. And that's not all. Here's where we get to the controversial. It's this third tier of blue cards where you're going to tell me that I'm crazy, but truthfully, Treasure Cruise is a really broken card. A lot of times you get to cast it for 1 blue and 2 others. Especially in a cube that has fetch lands, Treasure Cruise is a really strong card that never costs its sticker price and lets you draw 3. Delve is a busted mechanic, which is why Dig Through Time is on this list as well. Again, it's mana cheat, and Dig Through Time lets you dig 7 deep, which in a cube deck of only 30 or so cards after you draw, it's letting you look through a third of your deck, and that's insane. That's insane. There's a reason people in Vintage Cube tell you just draft the blue cards. It's because they're all this good. Speaking of good blue cards, the last blue card you shouldn't be running in your cube unless you're in a powered environment is Time Spiral. Now, most wheels aren't very good because you tap out, you refill yours and your opponent's hands, but then you pass the turn. But Time Spiral lets you reload for free, so you get first crack at your opponent with your brand new hand. Drawing 7 cards and untapping 6 lands is busted, no matter how you look at it. That's why this card's insane. We've talked about mana cheat, but there's actually one other kind of card that you're going to see on this list a few times, and that's tutor cards. Cards like Mystical Tutor that let you search your library for the best card in your deck are also best left in vintage environments. Mystical Tutor serves as a copy of every instant and sorcery in your deck that you can fetch up for just 1 mana. That's why she's crazy good. She enables combo, she lets you do broken things, she lets you have Sensei's Divining Top out and cast her to fetch a counter spell to then draw off the top to counter your opponent's problematic things. Mystical Tutor is ridiculous, and that's why, again, she's best left to a powered environment. She's not really a fair card for normal cube play. But let's leave blue and move to black, one of the most broken colors in a powered environment, and this is one of the main offenders. Mind Twist. This card is ridiculous and unfun. Even if you just Mind Twist your opponent for 3 cards at random, that's probably enough to just straight hose them out of the game. And a lot of times after the first few turns, you could Mind Twist them for the rest of their hand, and then they're in top deck mode. Mind Twist straight wins games. Mind Twist is incredibly unfun. Mind Twist only belongs in a vintage environment where you're doing degenerate things on purpose. Now, we just talked about Mystical Tutor, so let's go ahead and get 2 other guys out of the way real fast. Demonic Tutor and Vampiric Tutor. I used to play Demonic Tutor in our cube, and I will vouch this card is a pack 1, pick 1, slam dunk. You have to take it. You have to take Demonic Tutor. It's another copy of every card in your deck. It's a copy of the best card in your deck, and it lets you go get it, and you don't even have to reveal it. It's bonkers. And while Vampiric Tutor does force you to reveal whatever you're gonna get, you get to do it at instant speed. So you cast it on instep, and you show your opponent the card, but you're about to cast it on your turn anyway, so the fact that you have to reveal it isn't really a downside. So again, tutors are unfair unless you're in a powered environment. So these 3 guys you want to eschew. I'll even go ahead and point out Imperial Seal as the last black tutor that, again, tutoring for 1 mana, 2 mana, that's unfair. It's unfair. If you wanted to play the Grim Tutor that just got reprinted in M20 for 3 mana, I'm closer to being okay with that. 3 mana is closer to the right price because it also at least costs you 3 life, right? There's more downside with that card. Now, we talked about mana acceleration being broken, which is why Dark Ritual is most likely only a vintage card. In vintage formats, this guy can enable Storm, he can enable Black Aggro, but in a fair environment, casting Dark Ritual on turn 1 into Ophiomancer, or casting Dark Ritual on turn 1 into a 1-drop and a 2-drop, or casting it on turn 3 to play your 5-drop, Mana Acceleration, boys and girls. If you think Mana Acceleration is not broken, all you have to do is look at recent standard, where a card like Growth Spiral, which isn't playable in any other format, is banned because the mana acceleration off of it is just that good. Let's move on because there's more busted black stuff, and this is I can hear you typing right now. Reanimation effects are broken. Reanimation effects at 1 and 2 mana are extremely broken, and you have to be okay with swingy gameplay to play these in anything other than a vintage environment. And I'm guilty. Again, I'm guilty. We play these cards in our family's cube, and we are okay with insta-losing sometimes, and that is exactly what happens. Sometimes you get to cheat out a 8, 10, 12 mana threat on turn 1 or 2. Okay, not turn 1, but on turn 2. I've seen it done, and it's much more common on turn 3. You can do that. And when you start cheating that kind of mana, that's insane. When you start cheating 7, 8 mana on turn 2 or 3, holy crap. Even Wizards didn't understand how good this cheat was. Look, they printed Exhume at common. They printed this card at common. This card is insane. This card should have never been printed at common. That's how busted reanimation effects are in the early turns. Reanimation effects in a fair cube should start around turn 3 or 4. That's why in vintage this is fine. That's why in a legacy cube or less environment you might want to think about dialing up the mana cost of your reanimation effects. Now let's slide on to red. Red's got a couple of cards worth looking at. It's a more fair color, not as fair as white, but more fair. Red plays Wheel of Fortune. This is another cheap reload your hand spell that is pretty doggone unfair. It lets you empty your hand if you're in the aggro deck. You just dump all your stuff onto the field. That's right, it goes blah. You just throw it all on the field, and then you Wheel of Fortune to reanimate, reload, and start slinging burn again. Wheel of Fortune is fantastic, and anyone who thinks it is fair just hasn't cast it enough. But let's talk about red mana cheat. There might be a card you're not thinking about. We can cheat on mana in red, and we can do it with Simian Spirit Guide. Discard Simian Spirit Guide, add a red. That's free ramp. That's free ramp. This is Lotus Petal on a creature. You just discard it and add a mana. It's unfair, all right? Ramp shouldn't be free. And as a result, Simian Spirit Guide becomes a slam dunk early pick in a lot of non-powered drafts. In a true vintage environment, maybe there's something to pause or think about or hesitate on, but most of the time, free mana ramp is worth taking. And that's why this is another card that you might not have thought about it, but it really only belongs in a powered environment. Now let's move on to green and hit the obvious offenders really, really fast. Channel, we don't need to talk about Channel. Channel's broke. Everybody knows Channel's broke. So we're only playing that in vintage. But even a card like Fast Bond is incredibly strong in a vintage or non-vintage environment. I know, we've played it. We've played it a long time as a budget version of Exploration. Exploration is a green enchantment for 1 mana, and it lets you play 2 lands a turn. Right? Fast Bond lets you play as many lands as you have in your hand a turn, which lets you do some incredibly crazy things in games, like fetch lands out of your graveyard via Crucible of Worlds over and over and over again. Or you can strip mine every land your opponent has on the board if you have a Crucible of Worlds effect out. Fast Bond also just lets you play 4 lands on turn 1 and cast a Rabble Master. That's probably good enough to win you a game in any fair environment. Maybe not in a vintage powered environment, but in a normal environment, turn 1 Goblin Rabble Master is going to close out games. It necessitates your opponent having removal almost as much as a Giant Eldrazi on turn 1. When you start cheating 3 mana at a time, things get really, really crazy. There is another green card that you might not have thought about, but if you're paying attention, he's actually akin to our red card, and that's Elvish Spirit Guide. Elvish Spirit Guide, you can discard it from your hand and get a green. It's a Lotus Petal in green. How awesome is that? So this is another card, just like Simian Spirit Guide, that we have to get rid of. Getting to play your 2-drop or 3-drop a turn early in a color that already likes to ramp is insane. Elvish Spirit Guide is way too good. And our last green card, well, I gotta be honest, I'm guilty. I like this card, and if you've seen my pack one pick ones, you know I love Natural Order. And it's at 4 mana, and you have to have another green creature. Matt, how come this card is on the list? I actually think it's one of the more fair cards on the list, but here's the thing. You don't actually Natural Order on turn 4. You do it on turn 3 most of the time, and you sack the mana dork that you're using to ramp into Natural Order. I can't tell you how many times I have seen Natural Order cast with a Llanowar Elf, sack the Llanowar Elf, and then go get something crazy busted like, I don't know, Woodfall Primus, and start blowing up your opponent's lands. All on turn 3. If you're on the play, your opponent only had 2 lands and you just set them back to 1, and now you've got a 6/6 trampler that can't be removed easily. This is why Natural Order is a card you should consider pulling out of your cube if you don't want feel bad moments, if you don't want insta-win moments. Again, this all comes back to the kind of environment that you want to create, and some players, my family included, we like some big, bomby, swingy moments occasionally. I know you always hear me on this channel preaching about balance, and I'm a big fan of balance. Not that white card, but like maintain. Never mind, you knew what I meant. So I'm a big fan of balance, and I'm always pushing for my environment to run as smoothly as possible. But I also really like stories, and sometimes Cube is about what kind of stories you want to create inside your environment. So again, all of this just comes back to what you and your playgroup are okay with. Now let's move to gold. That's right, there is a gold card that's so busted we should only play it in a powered environment, and that's Lim-Dûl's Vault. This card lets you tutor pretty much your entire deck in our format. When you can dig as many cards deep as you have life and you're in a 40 card format, yeah, Lim-Dûl's Vault is insane. This card is crazy powerful in a unpowered environment. Now, in a powered environment, it's still really good, but at least your opponent is able to do some broken things to keep up with you. So if there's one gold card you should consider not running if you're trying to maintain a even power band in a legacy environment, Lim-Dûl's Vault, this card is nuts. So maybe you put it in the binder, just saying. So we're going to move to brown now. That's right, real men like their artifacts brown. And we're going to talk about some of the unfair things here. And we're going to go in order of CMC, shall we? Because in case you hadn't figured it out, 0 mana for ramp is broken. And that's why Wizards printed these cards twice and never, ever, ever did again, nor will they ever. So the Moxen and Lotus that we're going to get to in a second are all obvious cards that we don't want to play unless we're in a vintage environment. By the way, if you're interested in buying any of these cards, please use the Tcgplayer link in the show notes below. Just putting that out there. So the Moxen. Okay, we knew the Moxen were going to be banned, and we know that Lotus is going to be banned from non-powered environments as well. But some of these other cards I see players running in legacy environments, and they are not fair. They don't belong in those environments because what they do is they create auto picks on pick 1, like Mana Crypt. Mana Crypt is bonkers. A Soul Ring that costs less. Just think about that. It's a Soul Ring that costs less than Soul Ring. Yeah, that's unfair. Playing your Rabblemaster on turn 1 is bananas. This is also why Mox Diamond is on this list. Again, free mana. How much mana? 0 mana. Free mana. That's not okay. That's why Chrome Mox is on this list. And we've even talked about this next one a few times, Lotus Petal. 0 mana for artifact ramp is way too good for anything outside of powered. And you probably knew that. So let's move on, shall we? Coming in at 1 CMC, we have Soul Ring. You don't play this card in your cube. I played it in mine for a hot minute. You know what happens? Really broken things. Soul Ring can be argued to be better than Black Lotus because at least the Lotus goes away after 1 turn. Soul Ring just sits on the board and accrues value for you every single turn. Alright, I know that it's dirt cheap. I know it's dirt cheap and you've got 1,000 of them laying around because you play Commander. Do not put Soul Ring in your cube unless you are doing all the busted things. The same thing goes for this next card. Mana Vault. Yeah, 3 colorless mana for 1 mana. That's not fair. Don't do that, okay? Mana Vault on turn 1 means 5 drop on turn 2. You're cheating 3 mana. That's too much. You can't let players do that. You can't let players have these kinds of tempo swings. They're gonna blow people out. And the last one, and I admit that we play it, is Grim Monolith. At least he comes down on turn 2, and you have to pay 4 to untap him, but goodness gracious. Playing him on turn 2 means you can play a 6-drop on turn 3. I've seen it happen. Early Grim Monolith into Will Kennerith on turn 3, and the game's over. The game is over unless your opponent just happens to have the answer in hand. A 6-mana walker on turn 3 closes the door on everything your opponent wants to do. Once you hit 3 mana acceleration, when you get to skip ahead 3 turns, it's just too much. And that's why we shouldn't be playing these cards, again, unless you're okay with a swingy environment. Now, there are a couple of mono brown cards that maybe you shouldn't be running that aren't mana rocks. In particular, Time Vault, because most of the time if Time Vault's in the cube, then Voltaic Key or newly minted Manifold Key will be in the cube with it. I guess if those cards aren't there, then Time Vault's fair, but I've literally never seen it. I've never seen it. And Infinite Turns for 2 mana, when Voltaic Key only costs 1 mana, means you can start Infinite Turns on turn 3, and that's too good. That's too good. We're not going to do that, okay? So, Time Vault, too strong for regular cube, only empowered environments. And the last card I'll show you is Skull Clamp. Several weeks ago, I did a video on equipment, and I told you that Skull Clamp was the best equipment you could be running in your cube, and this is how much I believe it. Skull Clamp is so good, it just takes over games so well that you might only want to run it if you're in a vintage environment. It's so strong. Clamping tokens to draw cards is nuts. I've been in an aggro deck and should have lost, but I just used Skull Clamp to keep drawing more gas, and I just wouldn't die. I wouldn't die. My opponent should have killed me, but they never got to turn the corner because I never ran out of cards. I have seen Skull Clamp do that so many times. This equipment is the best equipment you could be playing in cube. I said it. It's better than all the swords. So maybe, just maybe, you want to rethink running it. Now, you might think we're done, but vintage environments include another busted card type, and that's lands. In particular, lands that provide mana acceleration. Ancient Tombs, City of Traders both ramp you ahead a full turn for the cost of basically nothing. Yes, I know, Ancient Tomb pings you for 2. Be quiet, kid in the back, sit down. All right, these cards are crazy. I've played Ancient Tomb in my cube. It was probably the last piece of pseudo vintageness that we cut out of our cube, and as a result, it's a pack one, pick one. Every time you saw it, unless it's in a pack with something else on this list, you always take Ancient Tomb, and that's how much better it is than everything else in the cube. Now, Tolarian Academy, Gaia's Cradle, they let you ramp ahead like we talked about, 2, 3, 4 mana sometimes, and when you start skipping turns to play your 8 drops on turn 4, that's unfair. So these 4 lands, this kind of mana ramp, only viable in a vintage environment. The next thing you might want to think about is mana denial. A lot of times mana denial is unfair. Cards like Rashidun Port deny your opponent mana. Then there are other lands that just hose your opponent, like, Maze of Ith. Sorry, don't attack anymore. You don't really want to anyway, it's fine. You don't want to attack anymore. Strip Mine, more mana denial. Wasteland, more mana denial. Mana denial is so strong, and I posited the argument with some of my friends on the Discord that you run Strip Mine and Wasteland to deal with busted threats like Maze of Ith and Rashidun Port. To which they casually asked me this simple question. How many times do I think that has happened? How many times has Strip Mine actually eaten Maze of Ith or Rashidun Port? And the answer is, I can probably count it on one hand. What happens most of the time is Strip Mine or Wasteland just eat my opponent's dual land and in an attempt to color hose them. And color hosing is not exactly the most fair way to win a game of Magic. It creates a lot of feel bads, and that's why Strip Mine and Wasteland are probably best in an environment that, has no rules. In an environment that will channel and cast an Eldrazi if they have 2 available green mana, so maybe you should Strip Mine that forest. So, Strip Mine, Wasteland, maybe you need to reconsider them. Also, Caracas. Yeah, how about you're just locked out of the game because whenever you play that threat, I'm just gonna bounce it right back to your hand. That's how strong Caracas is. I'm sorry, aggro deck. You can't play Karizev. Ever. She's a legendary. Put her back in your hand. And the last land that you should rethink running in your non-powered cube, but you should definitely order with the affiliate link. Definitely order this land with the affiliate link. We're super interested in our little 2% kickback of Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. Yeah, you want to play creatures? Sorry, I've got the Tabernacle out. Good game, though. Good game. We appreciate you. I hope you don't want to cast anything else or have a board. You know, like, this is the reason that you need Strip Mine and Wasteland in a format. Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale is bonkers and just straight hoses creature decks. And as a result, it should never be played in any kind of fair environment. And that's gonna do it. Whew, made it to the end of the list. I know a lot of you are going to disagree with some of these cards being fair or unfair, and you're welcome to tell me that in the comments below. But I'm actually more interested to hear about cards that you think maybe should be on this list, cards that are only viable in a vintage environment that maybe I've excluded. Are there cards that you think are so powerful that they ought to be involved? Lastly, I want to give a big shout out to my patrons, in particular Steven and Chris, for signing up before anyone even knew that I had a Patreon. That's how awesome these guys are, so shout out to my patrons. That's gonna do it for today, Cubers. If you've got a comment, if you've got a question, if you've got an episode idea, leave them down in the comments below. I'll take a look. Maybe we can work a little something out for you. You can always catch me on Twitter at cubefortwo. Slam that like button, slam the subscribe button, click that little bell so you get notified when our videos drop. And as always, and until next time, shuffle up and keep cubing, my friends.